Imagine you're standing in a cold underground archive in Vienna in the year 1891. 3 floors below the cobbled streets, the walls sweat with the chill of centuries, and the air smells like mildew paper and a hint of oil from an old hanging lamp. Above a scarred wooden table flickers the only light barely illuminating the surface where a ledger rests. Its leather binding is cracked and worn, the corners soft from decades of being turned opened, closed, opened again. The clerk who stands beside you opens the book to page 112. What's inside is not what you expect. Rows and rows of names, or rather numbers, carefully written with a stiff hand. Each entry tells the beginning of a life, but something is terribly wrong. The ledger lists dates of birth, exact weights, crib numbers, transfer stamps, even annotations about health status. But in the columns marked mother and father, there is either a void or a single word, unknown. It is not just 1 or 2 cases, but dozens, then hundreds. And the more you turn the pages, the more suffocating it becomes. And here's where the question begins to haunt, not just the pages, but the air around you. Why are these infants so perfectly documented, yet so completely disconnected from family, from memory, from identity? What kind of institution logs every gram of a newborn's weight, but leaves the parent fields blank, or worse, stamped, unknown? And when you look at the building itself and find it made of thick stone vaults, observation galleries, sealed ducts, you begin to wonder, was this ever meant to be a place of care, or was it built for something else entirely? Before we continue deeper into this buried system, if you find this story compelling, please support the channel by subscribing. It helps bring hidden histories like this to light. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you've already sensed the disturbing mystery behind the title, share this video with someone who's ready to ask the same. Question: who made this system and why the institution that recorded these children was not called an orphanage? That word carries echoes of care, however meager. The official title was Imperial Infant Depository Number 7. Depository. Not home, not refuge, not even hospital. That word depository suggests something else entirely. A place where things are stored, a warehouse for items in transit, a location, not for nurturing, but for containment. The only conclusion that rises from this cold vocabulary is this: someone saw these infants not as people, not as lives, but as units, assets, entries to be managed. And when you find the photos, the feeling intensifies. In one faded image from 1893, the main hall of this depository stretches like a corridor in a fortress. Stone walls, not plaster, vaulted ceilings with reinforced arches, iron-framed windows like the kind found in military compounds or factories. The floor is tiled in hard geometric mosaics, too hard to crack, too easy to clean. In the center, metal cribs arranged in mechanical rows, identical in spacing, identical in shape. Not for comfort, but for control. The outside of Imperial Infant Depository. Number 7 was imposing, but what lay inside stripped away any illusion of innocence or neglect. This was not a building shaped by compassion. It was a structure engineered with the precision of a vault and the scale of a factory. The outer walls were carved from limestone blocks, 90 centimeters thick, the kind of construction reserved for fortresses or banks, not nurseries. The foundation extended 4 meters below the surface, twice the depth required by any building code of the era. And the deeper you descend, the more disturbing the design becomes. The basement was not damp stone. It was concrete reinforced with iron mesh. A method costly, rare, and completely excessive for a childcare facility. The language of the materials: steel ceramic insulation, brass fittings, copper mesh. These are the materials of industry, not of care. Every room had a role, but not the kind you'd expect from a hospital or a shelter. The registry corridor was the first point of entry, a narrow passage that acted more like a checkpoint than a welcome hall. Infants were brought in, recorded, tagged, and assigned. From there, they were moved to the primary ward, a central space filled with rows of identical metal cribs. Their arrangement wasn't decorative, it was mathematical. Perfectly aligned columns, wide enough for staff to pass through efficiently, but close enough to maximize capacity. No toys, no family photographs, nothing of comfort or individuality. The windows were tall but placed so high on the wall that neither infant nor nurse could see the street outside. The ceiling was not adorned with frescoes or chandeliers, but reinforced beams and ventilation shafts built into the stone like arteries of some vast mechanical body. The side wings of the structure revealed even more unsettling features. Quiet Chamber A and Quiet Chamber B, soundproofed rooms with walls lined in cork and sealed doors padded with felt and rubber. These chambers were not simply places for infants to sleep. They were built to isolate and control sound in both directions. The air circulation hall stretched the full length of the building, linking each floor to vertical shafts that ran from basement to attic. The system was built with filters recalibrated quarterly and monitored according to a technical manual now lost. The purpose of this air system was never recorded in public documents, but maintenance logs describe adjustments to airflow tension tests, ceramic insulators, and pressure gauges, as if the building was alive and required tuning. Above the ward, the observation gallery sat like the eye of a watchtower. Glass panels built into the gallery wall allowed someone to look down into the main ward without being seen. The glass was tinted thick and confirmed in notes to allow one-way visibility. Nurses below would not have noticed watchers above, perhaps not even. Administrators would know who was stationed in that gallery. This wasn't medical oversight. It was surveillance. The records show it clearly someone was observing these children from above, behind glass walls in silence. This pattern repeated across the building. Each room had a hidden logic. Each corridor flowed into another, like components on a production line. Intake, recording, assessment, holding, and then finally transfer. Everything was labeled. Every object had a number. Every movement had a record, except the one thing that mattered: the why. Even stranger was what lay in the attic. A photo from 1894 captures a metallic framework bolted to the ceiling beams, arranged in rigid geometric shapes, like scaffolding designed not for support, but for function. Wires trailed down from it into the walls below. The purpose of the structure is not labeled in any archive, but the maintenance logs describe it in industrial terms. Copper mesh, ceramic insulators, tension cables. These words appear repeatedly, often alongside entries for part replacements, corrosion control, and power fluctuations. Later, the same attic was sealed off and the framework removed. Another photo dated 1902 shows the space again empty, this time with neat wooden panels bolted over the floor holes where the cables once dropped. A note on the back reads, "Renovation complete," but no municipal order corresponding to the renovation can be found. The entire system was built up, maintained, then stripped out like a machine, disassembled in silence. The language of the repair logs makes one thing brutally clear. This building was not just constructed with stone and brick. It was engineered. It had energy systems, grounding rods, cables that carried current or signal, or something else entirely beneath the floors, beneath the cribs. Why would an infant depository need ceramic insulation in the attic and grounding rods beneath the nursery? Is there any historical precedent for such design in childcare facilities? Not one. The nurse logs mention nothing of these systems. The official archive makes no note of their function. Their presence is undeniable, but their purpose has been erased, not lost, but scrubbed as cleanly as the metal object erased from the nursery photograph in the previous section. And if this was one building acting alone, perhaps it could be written off as eccentric construction, or a project with ambitions that outpaced its funding. But this was not one building. Maintenance logs mention supply shipments from places far beyond Vienna. Rail records list crates of brass fittings and copper mesh arriving from Western Germany. Items received from Cologne, Birmingham. Even remote cities bearing the same stamped mark, overlapping circles. Crates moving between infant facilities, cathedrals and hospitals, like parts of a puzzle scattered across a continent, each location receiving similar components, each one operating with protocols that resemble not compassion, but calibration. Then there's the curious note. In the attic inspection record, ceramic insulators intact, no visible cracks, tension cables adjusted. That language is not healthcare. That language is resonance. It is electronics or energy transfer or vibration systems. Yet no power grid in Vienna at that time would have demanded such design in a nursery. No heating system required such elaborate insulation. No lighting system needed tension adjustments. The technical manual referenced in the documents has never been found, and it is that absence which screams the loudest, because if the manual still existed, it would tell us what this building was truly for, and more importantly, who built it with such care and secrecy. The building's closure came in 1926, listed officially as decommissioned due to structural concerns and demolished soon after. But photographs survive to dispute that date. Images from 5 months later show the building intact, workers standing near the entrance as if it were still in use. A journal from a railway. Clerk mentions lights visible at night, the ones they say is abandoned, he writes. But I see people go in there sometimes. So, which is true? Did the building collapse or was it sealed? Does the decommissioning mark an end or a disguise? If the equipment was removed, where did it go? If the attic was sealed, who ordered it? And if the children were transferred, what was their destination? None of these questions are answered in the archive. The records trail ends in silence and edits and erasures. But the physical evidence remains: thick stone walls, air ducts like organ pipes, ceramic anchors built into the very bones of the building. The tools may be gone, but the tool marks are still there. Etched into every corridor, there is one undeniable conclusion that rises from the stone and dust of this place. This was not a shelter. It was an apparatus, a living instrument with human children at its center, built to specifications, monitored by procedures, and then erased, not because it failed, but because it had served its purpose. The records of its construction remain. The evidence of its use survives in fragments. The children whose first days began here left behind only their weights, their transfer dates, and the echo of something heavier, something that hung above their cribs, something that vibrated through the air, and perhaps through them. What this building did, we still do not know. But we know it was not passive, it was not kind. It was not built to nurture, it was built to perform something. And whatever that was, it required silence, surveillance, and stone. As the walls of the Vienna depository offered more questions than answers, the next step was clear. Stop staring at the building and start tracing what came into it. Not the infants this time, but the materials, the supplies, the strange pieces of equipment, referenced in maintenance logs, but never explained. In the year 1895, a rail depot manifest from the Eastern Freight Terminal lists routine shipments, grain textiles, timber machine, parts, all normal entries except for 3 short lines that read like a code unto themselves: crates, linen bottles, brass fittings, destination Imperial Infant Depository, number 7, origin cone freight hub, sender unlisted. These crates stood out not just because of their vague contents, but because of what was missing. No sender name, no commercial stamp, no point of return. Just arrival to a depository built like a vault and a list of crate numbers scribbled in the margin. K4417, K4418, K4419. The oddity would be easy to dismiss were it not for where those numbers appeared next. 2 years earlier in the city of Cologne, a cathedral inventory dated 1893 recorded 3 incoming crates of brass and ceramic components intended for installation in the lower levels, marked for acoustic purpose. Their reference numbers: K4417, K4418, K4419. The instruction attached to them reads, "Held per instruction. Do not open without authorization." Not only were the same crates present, but they were first, housed in a church basement before being shipped to an infant depository. This alone is enough to freeze the breath, because it suggests a network of silent passage hidden behind stone and sacred walls. The cathedral no longer retains those components. The inventory page is the only surviving evidence, and stamped at the bottom of that page is the first verified instance of a mark we now know all too well. 2 overlapping circles slightly offset like a figure 8, flattened. A symbol that has no department, no national seal, no institutional name. It appears again and again like a whisper passed between the cracks. Budapest, 1898. The city hospital logs a shipment to a municipal infant welfare site on the north side. Standard items include powdered milk blankets and bottles, but buried in the list is one line that does not belong. Resonance apparatus, disassembled. Crated stamp verified. Approved for reassembly on site. There is no description, no model number, no purpose listed. But the phrase is haunting. Resonance apparatus. It implies vibration, frequency, sound wave manipulation, something that hums, something that affects its environment without touching it. The stamp again is the overlapping circles. The hospital log marks the reassembly, completed 3 weeks later. The apparatus leaves no photograph, no drawing, no technical data, only confirmation of its quiet delivery and successful construction. By now, the pattern becomes too structured to ignore. Crates labeled with vague contents arrive from distant cities, all bearing the same mysterious symbol. They contain components that do not belong in childcare equipment: brass cylinders, ceramic mounts, copper mesh, acoustic plates. The shipments trace paths not only to infant facilities, but to other buildings that share the same architectural anomalies: churches with sealed basements, hospitals with unlisted wings. The stamp becomes the thread that ties them together. We discover an insurance claim from 1901, filed in Hamburg. That gives us our first glimpse of the object at the center. A shipment damaged in transit, the sender listed as Harmonic Instruments, Limited, Birmingham, England, the destination. A depot in Cove. The contents: acoustic ornaments, precision calibrated, handle with extreme care, do not strike. The form includes a rough sketch, a bell-shaped object 1 meter across, heavy and built for suspension. 4 mounting brackets ring its rim, the same object erased from the Vienna nursery photo. We attempt to trace the company Harmonic Instruments, limited through British trade records, but the trail evaporates. It does not appear in tax logs, corporate registries, or newspaper advertisements. It existed just long enough to ship brass devices across Europe and then vanished without trace. A paper entity, its presence only known through freight records and an insurance sketch. But the artifact described matches not only the Hamburg claim, but the object that hung over the children in Vienna. Of 4 chains, a bell-shaped mass, 1 meter wide. This was no church bell. Its proportions, its curve, the absence of any striker mechanism, all suggest it was not meant to ring. It was meant to resonate. The acoustic ornament, as it was called, appears again in Buenos Aires in a customs record from 1903. Arriving from Europe, listed as precision equipment, not for exhibition, handle with care, do not strike, the exact language used in Hamburg, and again stamped with the overlapping circles. Then comes a line in a staff diary from Buenos Aires, dated 1907. The writer notes a sound in the lower floors, a faint hum, steady, unchanging, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. The children sleep through it. It is not the first time we hear of this. A nurse's letter from Vienna mentions similar silence. A laundry worker in Budapest describes babies who never cry. The recurring theme is a quiet that feels unnatural, the absence of sound that implies something else is filling the air. The hum becomes an unofficial signature, a residual frequency in buildings designed with vents, shafts, ducts, copper and stone. A silent vibration that moves like breath through these architectural machines. At this point, the evidence no longer feels speculative. It feels like a supply chain. The crates are numbered, tracked, routed. They appear in multiple cities over several decades, from Cologne to Vienna, from Birmingham to Cove, from Hamburg to Budapest, and they carry a purpose hinted at in fragments: resonance acoustic precision apparatus. Crates meant not for trade, but for installation in a network of buildings, designed not to care for children, but to process them. This is reinforced by shipment origins and destinations, listed only by codes. Cone Freight Hub Facility, K Node West. The city names vanish, replaced by identifiers known only to the sender and the receiver, like a system trying not to be seen. We follow the crates further and discover a peculiar detail in a customs manifest from 1909: brass cylinders, imported into Prague, declared as sound calibration equipment intended for installation in a public institution. No further detail, no agency listed, but the official seal confirming the arrival is again the overlapping circles. The signature line reads, "Authorization confirmed per instruction, technical file retained." This phrase, "technical file retained," repeats in several similar logs, but none of those files survive today. The equipment was tracked. The function was described only in generalities. The paper trail offers proof of coordination, but not the true purpose, which raises the central question again. What exactly were these buildings doing? One clue surfaces in a storage inventory filed in Geneva in 1923, after the establishment of the League of Nations. The archive lists a series of items received from the dissolved Austro-Hungarian administration. Among them is item 447, acoustic apparatus, disassembled. Origin Imperial Coordination Office. Vienna classification, historical. Artifact do not display. The entry sits quietly among treaty drafts and census maps, but it confirms the existence of the device. It confirms Vienna as the source, and it confirms that the item was considered sensitive enough to hide. A photograph accompanies the entry showing a bell-shaped object with 4 suspension brackets resting on a pallet. The tag tied to its rim reads, "Completed as instructed, not as designed," which means someone altered its function before installation. Altered by order. And once more the photo bears the stamp. 2 overlapping circles. The deeper we follow these crates, the clearer the pattern becomes. This was not coincidence. It was not misfiled charity. This was logistical design. Crates of precise equipment, routed through cathedrals, hospitals, and child facilities, buildings with strange features all linked by silent stamps and unspoken protocols. All leading back to Vienna, the coordination office becomes the axis. The shipments become the veins, the children, the living data, processed through a machine that did not speak its name. The crates may have vanished, the company names dissolved, the files destroyed, but the routes they traveled still draw a map of purpose planned, executed, and buried. The discovery of the crates and their silent journeys across borders would have been unsettling enough. But the story deepened when we returned to the photographs, because images, unlike ledgers, carry a different kind of authority. They show what once stood in plain sight, and in Vienna there were 2 photographs that should never have existed together yet. Did one dated 1891, the other dated 1903, both labeled Imperial Infant Depository. Number 7, Primary Ward, Interior View. At first glance, they appear identical. Same angle, same rows of metal cribs, same tall windows, same 2 nurses standing at the edge of the frame. Their hands are folded, their faces blurred by the long exposure of early cameras. Everything seems unchanged until you lift your eyes to the ceiling. In the earlier photograph, a dark mass hangs above the center of the ward. Suspended by 4 heavy chains, it dominates the space between the ceiling beams. The object is rounded, metallic, and textured, catching a faint highlight from the window light. It is unmistakably present and impossible to ignore. In the later photograph, the object is gone. Not removed, not lowered, not replaced, but erased. The ceiling is smooth uniform, unbroken as if nothing had ever hung there. The chains vanish, the mounting points disappear, and yet the shadows betray the truth under magnification. Faint discolorations remain, where the chains once cast their lines across the plaster. It is not damage, it is correction. To understand what happened, we brought high-resolution scans of both photographs to a photo restoration specialist in Berlin. Someone trained to recognize the habits of early 20th century retouching. She studied the images, silently zooming until the paper grain became visible. Her conclusion was immediate and precise. The 1903 print shows deliberate hand retouching. The brushwork is subtle, professional, designed to match the surrounding tones and textures. Whoever did this knew photographic restoration well enough to fool casual inspection, but not well enough to erase every trace. The lighting on the patched ceiling does not align perfectly with the rest of the room. The shadows are wrong just slightly, but enough to reveal intent. This was not an accident of aging. This was an act of removal. The archive record makes the situation even more disturbing. The catalog entry for the 1903 photograph includes a note: print restored and reconditioned. Original negative unavailable. Original negative unavailable. Those words land with force, because without the original negative, there is no way to verify what else may have been altered. And the restoration note does not explain why restoration was required. The 1891 print survives, not because it was preserved by the institution, but because it was purchased at a private estate auction decades later. Its existence was accidental. The version held by the municipal archive is the edited one, the cleaned one, the version intended for public eyes. We searched the archive for the documentation related to this restoration. The catalog lists an administrative request. File attached. The reference number exists. The file does not. No checkout log, no transfer record, no destruction. Note, it is simply gone. After 3 hours of searching, an archivist found a separate staff memo dated 1904. The memo is brief, unsigned, and filed among unrelated administrative notes. It mentions visual materials revised for public presentation, sensitive technical elements excluded from general access. The language is bureaucratic, vague, and chilling. It confirms policy. Not mistake. Someone ordered that certain things not be seen. When placed alongside the Hamburg insurance sketch, the meaning sharpens. The bell, shaped object drawn in the claim, matches the silhouette in the 1891 photograph. The scale, the curvature, the four suspension points all align. This was not decoration. It was equipment. And its presence in a room full of infants was not incidental. It was part of the operation. And when the time came to present the institution as a simple welfare facility, the equipment was removed not only from the ceiling, but from memory. The photograph was altered. The negative disappeared. The paperwork followed. This was not the only image to suffer such treatment. In Budapest, a photograph from 1899 shows a similar ward, with a dark shape barely visible near the ceiling edge. In later reproductions, the shape is cropped out. In Prague, demolition surveys note obsolete mechanical framework removed prior to public documentation. No photographs of that framework survive. In each case, the visual record has been shaped to hide the same kind of object the pattern is too consistent to ignore. Someone curated history. The act of erasing an object from a photograph is not a trivial one. In this period, retouching was expensive and time-consuming. It required skill and intention. It also required approval. Photographs were official records, especially those stored in municipal archives. To alter them was to alter reality as it would be remembered. This was not the work of a rogue technician. This was policy, and policy implies authority. The question becomes, who had the authority to order such changes across institutions and cities? The more we examine the altered images, the more we understand that the system did not merely operate in silence. It actively managed perception. The children were recorded. The buildings were photographed. The equipment was installed. But when scrutiny threatened the narrative, the visual evidence was corrected. The system anticipated future eyes and prepared the past accordingly. It did not rely on secrecy alone. It relied on control of the record. There is a profound difference between hiding a machine and erasing its shadow. The latter requires foresight. It assumes someone will look. It assumes questions will be asked. And it acts in advance to ensure those questions lead nowhere. The removal of the object from the Vienna photograph did not just hide equipment. It reframed the entire institution. Without the hanging apparatus, the ward becomes merely austere rather than mechanical. Without the chains, the ceiling reads as ordinary. Without the object, the children appear to sleep under, nothing more than stone and air. And yet, the ghost remains. The shadows linger. The maintenance logs still reference equipment that no longer appears. The shipping records still list acoustic devices. The insurance sketch still exists. The system failed to erase everything. It erased just enough to make the truth harder to see, but not impossible. That is the tension at the heart of this investigation. Every time the record tries to close the door, it leaves a crack. Every time. An image is cleaned, a residue remains. Every time a file disappears, a reference survives somewhere else. By altering images, the system reveals something essential about itself. It was not content to operate. It wanted to be forgotten. It anticipated collapse, political change, public inquiry. And it prepared for those moments by editing the past. The object that hung above the children was not only removed physically, it was removed symbolically. It was stripped from the story the city would tell itself about what these buildings were for. The question now is not whether the erasure occurred. The evidence proves that it did. The question is why this particular object inspired such careful removal and what it did to the children beneath it. Because if the object was harmless, it would not need to vanish. If it was benign, it would not be hidden. If it was charity, it would be displayed. Instead, it was erased chain by chain, shadow by shadow, until only the outline remained, for those who know how to look. And once you see it, once you begin to see it everywhere, in the gaps in photographs, in the missing negatives, in the notes that say restored but never explain why history was edited. And the edits point us towards something the system feared would be understood. Vienna was the beginning, but never the boundary. The evidence from its ledgers, its architecture, its altered images, all pointed to something wider, deeper. Something that could not be contained in one city. We had already seen the crates traveling from Cologne, the insurance claims from Hamburg, the manufacturing ghost in Birmingham. But it wasn't until we examined 3 other cities, Budapest, Prague, and Kov, that the full scale of the system began to emerge. Each of these places held an infant facility, constructed between 1880 and 1915. Each shared nearly identical design features. Each appeared in municipal records under unfamiliar labels: infant depository welfare station, child processing facility. and it is that last. Word processing that cracks the surface, not care, not shelter, not recovery. Processing Budapest. The facility stood on Váci Road near the Northern Rail terminus until its official closure in 1929. The building is gone, replaced by a textile warehouse, but the foundation was never removed. Instead, it was incorporated into the new structure, a decision made to save cost and labor. We contacted the current property owner and received permission to access the basement. What we found underneath the modern flooring was a layout almost identical to Vienna. A long corridor aligned with thick columns, side chambers with strangely reinforced walls, and most tellingly in the ceiling of the central vault, 4 iron brackets evenly spaced, positioned precisely to hold suspension chains, matching those seen in the Vienna photograph, still bolted into place after all these years. Still silent but present. At each corner where these brackets met the walls, ceramic insulators remained embedded in the stone, no power cables, no function today. But they predated the building's official wiring installation by at least 15 years. The current maintenance supervisor admitted we thought it was old factory equipment. We left it alone. It was too much trouble to tear out old factory equipment in a building that, on paper, was never a factory. Just like Vienna, this facility was built for a hidden function, one that left behind industrial scars impossible to explain. With any normal story of childcare, Prague offers even clearer evidence. The infant facility on Karlin Street was demolished in 1931, but not before city engineers performed a detailed structural survey prior to the building's removal. Those survey documents survive preserved in the municipal archive like fossils. Their description reads like déjà vu: 61 meters long, 20 meters wide, 3 floors above ground, 1 below foundation, reinforced with concrete walls of dressed stone, 85 centimeters thick, and, in the attic listed under obsolete mechanical installation, a note framework removed, weighed approximately 800 kilograms, no longer functional. The structure was never photographed, never sketched. The only record is its weight and a disposal receipt to a metal foundry, a machine reduced to scrap. But it was the lower level that delivered the sharpest blow. The surveyor's notes describe acoustic dampening materials observed in subterranean chambers. Cork panels lining walls felt inserts within sealed doors. Rubber thresholds. Purpose unclear. Origin undetermined, unusual for structures of this type. Once again, a chamber designed not to echo, not to reflect, not to resonate, built to absorb, built to isolate. Soundproofing appears in every facility we have investigated, and always in conjunction with sealed chambers, ducts, vents, shafts, and frameworks that behave not like rooms, but like instruments. Then came Kov. In many ways, the most revealing sight, the facility on Detla Street continued operating long. After its sisters had been shuttered, officially it served as a municipal orphanage until 1951. Afterward, it was converted into a record storage depot for the regional government, which meant that unlike the other cities, the building wasn't erased. Its paperwork wasn't lost to fire or war. It simply piled up. For decades, staff logs, architectural drawings, construction approvals all survived, preserved in a state archive more neglected than restricted. And within those papers was the line that altered the investigation completely. A construction approval document from 1892 bears this note: design approved per specification, received from Central Coordination Office. Vienna, all deviations require written authorization. Stamp and countersign required on all transfer documentation. In one sentence, the theory becomes fact. These buildings were not the results of local planning. They were not designed independently by cities responding to social need. They were nodes in a larger system designed to shared specifications. Coordinated from a single authority in Vienna, the implications are vast. It means the features we've seen repeated across these sites, the air circulation halls, the observation galleries, the suspended equipment, the soundproofed rooms, all of it was planned centrally, executed under the same hand, the same authority that received the acoustic apparatus in Vienna, the same authority that filed shipment codes, the same one that altered photos, the one that had the power to send crates from one end of the continent to another and never explain why. Overlaying the maps of the 3 cities reveals another layer of intent. Each facility sits within 500 meters of a major railway line. Each lies near municipal water infrastructure. rivers, pumping stations, aqueduct, junctions. Each is positioned on elevated ground above floodplains, each placed for stability, connection, and access. Not randomly built, not where property was cheap or convenient built, where they could draw from the land and the logistics. Built where heavy stone could stand, built where carriages could arrive unnoticed at night and leave before sunrise, and each facility also exhibits another shared pattern: recorded children who bear no trace of family, blank parent fields, repetitive names, coded destinations, transfers that happen at precise intervals and move infants not into homes, but into the unknown. The registry pages whisper the same empty sentence over and over. They came, they were recorded, they were transferred. And no one ever said where. Budapest also gave us a chilling echo of Vienna, a maintenance log, lists unexplained, humming in the sublevel, no source identified, vibration present, even when utilities are shut down. Similar language to what we saw in the Buenos Aires diary. The hum, a frequency that moves through stone, a resonance without a machine, still felt after the system supposedly ended. The coordination office in Vienna appears in more and more documents. Letters, shipment logs, approval forms, even internal memos. Though it never appears in public census data or architectural blueprints, it exists behind the scenes like a hidden conductor, orchestrating a silent symphony. A central node from which authority radiated and to which all instructions returned. This is no longer an accident of overlapping designs or a fluke of bureaucratic language. This is deliberate construction. A network designed to process children, not care for them. A structure that operated across borders, across languages, across governments. Built like a single organism, using copper ducts, limestone ribs, and ceramic nerves. A system with a pulse and a protocol. One that began in Vienna, but spread like roots through the soil of an entire continent, and the children were its fuel. The buildings formed a network, the shipments tied them together. The architectural details matched across borders and decades. But what about the children themselves, the infants so meticulously documented, yet so utterly disconnected from identity? We had already seen the empty parent fields in the Vienna ledgers and similar absences in Budapest, Prague, and Kyiv. But when we stopped looking at what was missing and started paying attention to what was actually there, a new pattern emerged. A strange repetitive rhythm hidden in plain sight. The names. At first they seemed ordinary, familiar names like Maria Johann, Anna Ferenc, Joseph names, common across Central Europe in the late 19th century. Names that would not draw suspicion on their own. But then we noticed the clustering. In the Vienna registry between March and June of 1892, 14 infants were recorded. 8 of them bore the exact same first name. Maria, not variations. Not Mari, not Marie. Mariah, identical spelling, identical script, born within days of each other, placed in different wards, transferred on different days, but sharing one common thread. The name. This was not a coincidence. In Budapest, a similar anomaly occurred in 1895. 11 children entered over a 2-month period. 6 named Ferenc, a name that rarely appeared elsewhere that year, concentrated entirely in this narrow window. In Prague, the pattern changed. Not in the names themselves, but in their presentation. Infant Karl, 7. Infant Anna, 3. Infant Joseph. 12 numbers attached like product labels. More than just record keeping. This was categorization identifiers that felt less like names and more like stock units or designations within a series. Then came Kyiv, where the illusion of individuality dropped completely. The 1893 registry lists children not by name at all, but by batch series 12, batch 3. Arrival group, no personal identity, no family name, just intake groupings and arrival numbers. At this point, we consulted a historian specializing in Central European foundling homes. She confirmed that institutions often assigned names to abandoned children, sometimes based on saints' days or intake dates or even nurse preference. But when she reviewed our clustered data, her response was immediate. Clustering is unusual, she said. Random assignment should produce variation, not repetition. If 8 infants in a row receive the same name, something else is shaping it. Either a rigid protocol or a system that generates those names, by rule, not by hand. The deeper implication began to settle. If the names were not chosen out of care, but generated from some internal pattern, then they were not meant to last. They were placeholders, tokens used by the system until something else replaced them. The names were not identities, they were tags. Then came the letter. A small piece of paper saved in a private family collection and donated to a regional museum in 1981. Written in 1896 by a nurse stationed at the Vienna Depository, it was addressed to her sister in Salzburg. She describes her daily work. The children are quiet, well-fed, rarely sick. The building is clean and orderly but strange. And then she writes, "We are told not to ask about the families. We are told to record only what matters, the weight, the health, the number, and then one line that silences the room. When I asked why the names repeat, the supervisor said it was not my concern. She said the names are temporary. She said the children will receive their true names later when they are placed, not adopted, not fostered, placed. The word is cold, impersonal, and carefully chosen. It suggests movement without destination, transfer without permanence. It implies that the children were going somewhere, but not necessarily into homes. Somewhere that required anonymity at the start and a new identity later. The nurse ends her letter. I do not know where they go. The transfers happen at night. The carriages have no markings. I am told. This is for the children's safety. I want to believe her. The letter ends abruptly. No resolution. No explanation. Just the hollow weight of not knowing. From this point forward, the registries feel different. Every name now glows with artificial light. Names that were never meant to endure. Names assigned by rotation, by habit, or perhaps even by algorithm. If the children were not expected to retain these names, then who were they meant to become? And for what purpose? We began looking at the name sequences through a new lens. Pattern recognition, alphabetical rotation, frequency cycles. Were these names linked to intake order, to health status, to geographic origin? Or were they randomized to obscure any chance of connecting the child to their past? Because if that was the goal, it worked brilliantly. These names provide no trace, no lineage, no anchor. Just a brief label recorded, then removed. A second document, added weight to the suspicion. A printed form titled Infant Naming Record. Template discovered in the Prague Municipal Archive. It lists columns for assigned first name intake, date crib assignment, transfer date, and in the bottom margin in faded type, assigned names subject to change upon reassignment destination. Authority may override. The term destination. Authority appears nowhere else in the archive. No address, no department, no contact. Only that phrase, like a title used inside a system no longer visible from outside. More and more, it appears that the names were tools of control, not of comfort. The children were entered into a program that needed them to be accounted for, but not known. A system that needed weight and date, but not origin. A machine that required uniformity, and managed even identity with bureaucratic distance. The nurse's letter becomes more haunting. The longer you sit with it, they will receive their true names later. It means that somewhere someone believed the child's real life would start, not in the ward, not in the registry, but after the transfer, after they were placed. Where was it? A training center? A remote institution? A facility never named in any public document? The answer remains hidden, but the patterns scream intent. Repetition is not accident in a system this meticulous. Every child was measured, weighed, numbered, logged. Every child was transferred, and every child was renamed, which means every child was erased once and then remade. The names themselves are almost tragic in their simplicity, so familiar that they vanish into the blur of memory. Names meant to soothe, to normalize, to hide the enormity of what was happening. Each name recorded not as a beginning, but as a cover. Names as masks worn just long enough to pass through a corridor into another reality. This is not how care functions. This is how systems function. And yet, in all this silence, one voice from the inside told the truth. A nurse who questioned the repetition. A woman who was told not to ask, who wrote her doubts in ink before the silence claimed her too. Her words survived, not because anyone meant them to, but because her sister kept the letter tucked in a family Bible passed through generations until it reached a museum collection over a century later. And it is that single act of memory outside, the system that lets us hear the truth. These names were never theirs. They were placeholders for children whose real lives began in a place we still cannot see. At first, the floor plans looked like any other institutional architecture. Narrow halls, wide rooms, functional symmetry. But when we stopped reading them like nurseries and started reading them like blueprints for devices, everything changed. These buildings were not shaped by the needs of children, they were shaped by the needs of a process. Once that lens clicks into place, the rooms stop looking like places to sleep or heal or play. They become chambers circuits, components in a larger machine built from stone, metal, and silence. Every one of these facilities began with a registry corridor, a narrow space where new arrivals were recorded, weighed, named, and assigned a number. It was the first step, the intake, the calibration point. From there, the corridor led into a central ward, a vast open space lined with cribs and high windows, placed too far up for anyone to see outside. This was not light for comfort. This was light for control. The layout of the ward was mathematical rows of identical beds placed in perfect symmetry, allowing easy movement along predefined paths. More grid than room, more equation than care. But what made the design undeniable were the wings branching from the central hub. Each wing had a unique function on paper, but those functions always fell into the same sequence. Intake, processing, observation, transfer, a system. The quiet chambers lined with cork were not random. They were isolation units, soundproof, and sealed, not to protect from noise, but to measure without interference. The air circulation shafts that ran from basement to attic were not ordinary ventilation systems. They were oversized, engineered with filters and tension regulators, each duct feeding every chamber like arteries feeding organs. In the Vienna maintenance logs, airflow calibration is listed alongside ceramic insulator checks and copper mesh. Replacement. These are not childcare tasks. These are technical adjustments, precision controls for an internal environment, governed not by temperature or hygiene, but by resonance and conduction. The ducts themselves were often large enough to carry low-frequency vibrations, the same vibrations described in multiple staff accounts as a hum. The same frequencies that modern acoustic science links to altered emotional states, to discomfort, to fear, to silence. Above the wards, the observation galleries served no nurturing function. Thick glass windows one way only allowed unseen watchers to monitor activity below. From the outside, these rooms resemble hospital balconies. From the inside, they resemble surveillance booths. No record exists of who stood behind those windows. No record of what was observed. No record of what they were looking for. Only the proof that someone watched without being seen. Underneath the floors, the copper mesh and grounding rods formed an invisible layer, a conductive bed. Beneath the infant's maintenance entries detail the regular inspection of these systems entries that read more like power grid reports than hospital logs. Tension levels, corrosion, control, grounding integrity, checks. Nothing in these logs speaks to comfort. Everything speaks to continuity, to flow, to energy, to calibration. Then there is the attic framework referenced again and again in demolition surveys and inventory memos. A structure of metal beams, wires, and brackets arranged with too much care to be storage. One photo from Vienna shows it clearly suspended from the ceiling like the ribs of a skeletal canopy. Cables drop from it into the floors below. This framework appears only in early photographs. By the time public records are created, it has been removed neatly surgically. The documents listed as obsolete mechanical structure, or in some cases as unidentified installation. But no technical drawings survive. Nothing to tell us what it was built to do, only that it was built intentionally, and removed just as deliberately. If we strip away the labels, if we stop calling the wards nurseries and the chambers recovery rooms, if we remove the names given by the system and look only at the shape, what we are left with is a machine. A mechanism designed to intake human beings, apply a set of conditions, monitor responses, and then release the result into the next stage. What was being measured, what was being controlled, what was being produced. We still do not know. But the shape remains: the intake corridor, the registry checkpoint, the central ward of symmetrical beds, the surrounding wings of sealed chambers, the galleries of glass above, and the ducts of air and sound below. This is not the architecture of care. This is the architecture of process. And what moved through that process were infants, not patients, not students, not wards, infants too young to speak to, remember to resist. Children whose only recorded traits were physical weight, health, viability, transfer readiness. The ledgers log their weight to the gram, their feeding to the milliliter, their movements to the hour, but they do not log affection. They do not log names that last, or caretakers who stay. They log inputs and outputs, data and motion, like a system measuring conditions, then responding with transfer. Even the timing reveals design. Infants stayed in these facilities for short, precise windows: 16 days, 18 days, 3 weeks, then gone, transferred to destinations that exist only in code. No receiving agency is ever listed. No family name appears. No foster program is described. The destination field simply reads, Facility K, Node, West Station, 12. Meaningless to the public, precise to the system. This rhythm is not the rhythm of care. It is the rhythm of a controlled study. The rhythm of a process that moves too quickly and too cleanly to be accidental. Some infants were moved sooner, some later, but always within a narrow band, as if waiting for a marker to be reached, a certain wait, a certain silence, a certain reaction. The nurse in Vienna wrote that the children would receive their true names later when they were placed. But what if the placement was not adoption, but deployment? What if the name change was not to welcome them into a family, but to finalize their role in the system? One document from the Budapest archive adds a final disturbing piece, a transfer order listing 15 children assigned for movement overnight. The order is stamped with the overlapping circles. No names are included, only numbers, weights, and crib assignments. The receiving location is not a city or home, but a designation. Node 8 Series 2 transport authorized by Coordination Office, Vienna. The children are referred to as units. Movement is described as allocation. No explanation of purpose, no mention of destination. So, what were these children being selected for? What determined whether they were transferred at 16 days or 18? What was happening in the quiet chambers? What was being measured from the galleries? What flowed through the ducts that needed calibration and filters and pressure readings? What purpose did the grounding mesh beneath the beds serve? What resonance was being conducted? What hum was being maintained? No public record will answer. These are questions the archive was not meant to keep. The photos were altered, the frameworks removed, the negatives lost, the manuals missing. The words that remain were the ones no one noticed, the maintenance logs, the shipment receipts, the strange phrases tucked in margins, completed as instructed, not as designed. These buildings were machines, machines tuned to children, children processed through instruments that had no public explanation, machines operated in cities across Europe, machines wired to silence machines fed by infants recorded in ledgers, with no parents, no names, no past, machines watched from above, machines adjusted from within machines, with one purpose never named and one hum that never stopped. By now, the shape of the system in Europe was unmistakable, a central coordination point in Vienna, a distribution network of near-identical buildings scattered across cities, coded shipments, specialized equipment, and thousands of children recorded without families. But then something shifted. What we had believed to be continental in scope began to stretch across oceans. The crates, the codes, the hum, the silence, they all began appearing in places far from Central Europe, in cities with no direct political link to the Austro-Hungarian administration. The echoes reached across hemispheres, and what they returned confirmed a terrible truth. This system was never local. It was global. The first new thread came from St. Petersburg. A registry from the Imperial Foundling Home, dated 1901, described incoming equipment for basement installation. The items listed copper wire, insulated ceramic mounting brackets, and 4 brass resonance chambers. The entry bore a notation in French, stating Origin Vienna Coordination Office, the same phrase used in the construction approval document from KOV, the same unseen authority coordinating movements across borders, across languages, across regimes. The St. Petersburg home was known historically as a charitable institution funded by the Russian crown and staffed by women recruited from rural parishes. But its building told another story. An architectural survey from 1894 revealed granite walls over 1 meter thick basement levels, dropping 3 floors below street-level drainage systems designed to keep out groundwater in one of the most waterlogged cities in Europe. Why build so deep? Why use materials more suited to a fortress than a nursery in Boston? The Massachusetts Infant Asylum operated from 1867 until its closure in 1918, publicly praised as progressive, medically advanced, and humane. Its records painted a picture of American benevolence. But the blueprints filed in the state archives told a story we had seen before, a central registry corridor, feeding into a high-ceilinged nursery with rows of identical cribs. an attic housing mechanical infrastructure, and a basement labeled with isolation chambers and conditioning rooms. One photograph from 1899 captured the main ward in haunting symmetry. Rows of beds, two nurses' tall arched windows, and in the shadows near the ceiling, a suspended shape, indistinct but unmistakable bell, shaped mounted by 4 chains. It hung above the cribs, just like the one in Vienna. No edit was ever made to the photo. No one thought to examine it closely. It sat in the archive for over a century, like a confession waiting for the right question. Then came Buenos Aires. The Casa de los Expuestos operated from 1880 to 1922, a municipal home for abandoned children. Its public records were sparse and uneventful, but a customs archive preserved a museum crate list. From 1903, items received from Europe listed as acoustic ornaments. Precision calibrated, handle with care, do not strike, stamped verified. The wording was identical to the Hamburg insurance claim, the same warning, the same deliberate vagueness, the same overlapping circle stamp. A pattern now stretched across continents. In a staff diary from Buenos Aires, dated 1907, a worker wrote about a persistent hum in the lower floors. She described it as low, steady, not loud, but always present. The children sleep through it, she wrote. I cannot. The phrase echoed lines from the Budapest hospital ledger and the Vienna nurse's letter. Different countries, different languages, same details. The hum, an ambient frequency. A vibration that passed unnoticed, except by those who stayed long enough to feel it. No machinery was recorded in any maintenance log. No explanation offered. The silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something unspoken. As the locations multiplied, the features remained constant. Stone buildings built to exacting standards. Soundproof chambers. Ventilation systems that spanned multiple floors, suspended apparatus that never appeared in any equipment budget, transfer logs that used codes instead of cities, registers that listed children with no known parents, and names that repeated like placeholders, Buenos Aires, Boston, St. Petersburg. All bore the same fingerprint. The most disturbing document appeared in a Geneva inventory from 1923, after the founding of the League of Nations. A storage list recorded assets received from the former Austro-Hungarian administration. And among maps and census forms, one entry stood out. Item 447 acoustic apparatus, disassembled. Origin Vienna Coordination Office. Classification, historical artifact. Do not display, stored in Vault 12, basement level 3. The item was accompanied by a photograph. A 1-meter-wide bell-shaped metal object with 4 mounting points, identical to the erased object in the Vienna photograph. Identical to the sketch from Hamburg, identical to the form in Boston's nursery ceiling. The tag attached to. The object bore a chilling line, completed as instructed, not as designed. A sentence that implies interference, change control. Someone built it to a plan, but someone else changed the plan and ensured that record was noted. Alongside the photograph, a single-page report was filed. No date, no signature, no department listed. It reads like an obituary for the system. Final report. Network discontinued. All primary apparatus decommissioned and transferred to secure storage. Secondary materials disposed per protocol. Personnel reassigned registry archives to be sealed for 50 years. Recommend permanent classification. The words ring with finality, but the silence behind them is even louder. If the system was harmless, why hide it? If the apparatus served no dark purpose, why seal the records? Why remove the names? Why erase the negatives? Why build in silence and vanish just as quietly? One paragraph in the report stands apart. Results inconclusive. Preliminary data suggests correlation between acoustic, exposure, and developmental markers, but sample contamination and inconsistent protocols prevent definitive conclusions. Further research not recommended under current political conditions. And all findings to remain classified. Impending future review. The implications are devastating. The system was not simply housing children, it was testing them. Not passively, but with intent. With variables, with exposure, with monitoring. It was an experiment, and the subjects were infants. This means the architecture was not excessive, it was essential. The ducts were not overbuilt. They were tuned. The soundproofing was not a luxury, it was containment. The bell-shaped objects were not decorative, they were functional. The mesh beneath the floors was not structural, it was instrumental. The entire building was not a shelter. It was an apparatus. And despite the final report, despite the official discontinuation, something still lingers. In two separate cases, decades after closure, workers reported discovering remnants: foundations, duct shafts, ceramic mounts, metal brackets. In Vienna in 1987, a construction crew uncovered a sealed basement beneath what was believed to be an empty lot. The city called it industrial scrap, poured concrete over it. The next week, one worker kept a photo. It showed a circular depression in the floor, 1 meter wide, matching the Geneva mounting pattern. In Budapest, in 2003, a sound engineer was hired to investigate vibrations in a warehouse basement built atop the old Váci Road facility. The frequency he measured was 17 hertz, below the threshold of human hearing, but known to cause discomfort, nausea, and disorientation in sensitive individuals. The source could not be identified. The report concluded the tone likely originated from the foundation itself, a resonance echo from a structure long gone or a frequency never truly silenced. We cannot prove the apparatus still functions. We cannot prove the system survived beyond its paperwork. But what we can say is this: between 1880 and 1920, a global network existed. Its architecture was standardized. Its records were altered. Its subjects were children, and its purpose remains obscured. It was not built by accident. It did not end without planning. And what traces remain still carry the hum of something that never wanted to be understood. We have followed this system from ledgers to architecture, from shipping manifests to sealed photographs, from coded transfers to altered blueprints. We have seen the infants with blank parent fields, the cribs arranged in military precision, the bell-shaped objects suspended above the sleeping. We have traced the shipments of resonance apparatus across 3 continents, watched names repeat in cycles like clockwork ticked by unknown rules. We have stood in basements still wired with copper mesh, still humming with sound below the threshold of hearing. And now we must stop. Not because the trail ends, but because we have reached the edge where only silence remains. Behind every code, every transfer stamp, every erasure, there is a cost. A human cost that cannot be ignored or reduced to a pattern. Hundreds of children, perhaps thousands, passed through this network between 1880 and 1920. All of them recorded down to the gram, down to the minute. All of them stripped of lineage, names given names, replaced, and transferred to unknown destinations. The machinery kept perfect records of weight, of health, of movement. But it wrote nothing of who they were or where they came from. It wrote nothing of why would a system so precise, so coordinated, so carefully hidden care, enough to log every intake but not preserve a single family name, why erase origins so completely and then maintain transfer schedules with factory discipline, why retain technical records of copper mesh replacements but leave the line for mother blank not once or twice, but as standard procedure, why measure infants as if they were specimens, log their viability, note their silence, and then move them without a trace to destinations hidden behind code. This is not how hospitals operate. It is not how shelters operate. It is not how orphanages operate. It is how instruments operate. Devices tuned to function, machines that exist not for empathy, but for result. The evidence no longer suggests a system built from neglect or chaos or underfunding. It suggests design. It suggests engineering, the coordination of physical infrastructure, social policy, and bureaucratic language to shape human beings into something measurable and then usable. We must sit with the cruelty of that possibility. Imagine growing up, not knowing your mother's name, not knowing if you had siblings, not knowing what language your parents spoke or what street you were born on. Imagine the blank fields in your own history, not as accident but as intention. Your name was not yours. Your transfer was not explained. Your identity was an administrative convenience to be changed when necessary for the sake of a larger purpose. Some children must have survived. They must have grown up, lived entire lives without ever learning the system they passed through. Perhaps some still live today, unaware of the building they once slept in, the object that once hung above them, the registry that still bears their weight, their crib number, their day of transfer, and nothing else. They have descendants, perhaps families who will never know that a great-grandmother or grandfather was once a number in a ledger marked unknown. And yet the system told itself it was mercy. The Vienna clerk interviewed in 1968 said they told us it was for the future, that these children would be given what their families could not. She believed it. She wanted to believe it. So did the nurse who wrote of the transfers at night. So did the laundry worker who described the hum that kept her awake while the infant slept too silently. Mercy. That word returns again and again. But whose definition of mercy was this? Who decided that erasure was kindness, that numbers were better than names, that quiet was safer than comfort? We found legal documents preserved in the Austrian State Archive, dated 1887, describing institutional guardianship for children of unsuitable origin. The memorandum reads, "The child shall be registered under institutional authority. The institution shall assume all rights and responsibilities of guardianship. The record shall reflect institutional designation rather than familial lineage. It explains the blank fields. It explains the names that never lasted. It explains the separation from biological history. But it does not explain the architecture. It does not explain the equipment. It does not explain the humming. Law can account for custody, but not for copper mesh under cribs. Law can authorize care, but not one-way observation galleries. Law can justify naming protocols, but not resonance devices suspended over infants. Law does not require attics built for metal frameworks, or basements built like bunkers sealed with ceramic brackets. Law cannot explain edited photographs, or vanished manuals, or falsified demolition reports. These elements speak not to legality, but to something else entirely, purpose unnamed, but unmistakable. A final question remains. What were these children being prepared for? The system did not foster them. It processed them. It measured them. It transferred them quickly, efficiently, precisely. Something was being selected. Something was being tested. Perhaps a reaction. Perhaps a condition. Perhaps a trait that could be measured by exposure to vibration, by isolation, by observation under controlled environmental parameters. The results, we are told, were inconclusive. Sample contamination, inconsistent protocols. But the investment, the scale, the silence says otherwise. Someone believed it would work, until they decided it would not, or until it worked too well. The network was discontinued according to the Geneva Report, the apparatus decommissioned, the records sealed, the files classified. And yet the buildings remained for years. The hums continued, the memories scattered through letters and logs and photographs, edited too late to erase everything. The machine was turned off on paper, but its shape remained in stone and silence and scar tissue. Today we cannot say what the system was for. We cannot say what it found or what it sought or why it was buried with such care. But we can say it existed. We can say it left behind ledgers and walls and ducts and shadows. We can say it processed children with a level of precision. No orphanage ever needed, and kept records so clean they became a kind of lie. A truth so managed, it became invisible. The final cruelty is this. The system may be gone, but the people it touched still live in the world unaware, shaped in ways they cannot name, influenced by structures they never saw. Their origin stories replaced by silence, their real names perhaps never spoken, their first days spent beneath ceilings that once held. Machines whose purpose has been classified beyond memory. This was not mercy, this was machinery, and the sound it made still echoes somewhere low, steady, unseen, and unanswered.